Hey guys, and welcome back to another Actionscript 3 video tutorial on game design. Sorry it's been a while since I've gotten back to these video tutorials. I just had a crazy long Christmas break and yeah, it's been good, but time to get back to work and finish this thing off. So what we're going to do in this tutorial is we're going to be checking for an endgame condition, and then we're going to be showing up a screen that says your game's over, would you like to play again, and we head back to the start and we can restart our game. So the first thing we need to do is probably get a condition. So we're going to check every frame if our game is at the end, and we're going to say our game ends when the player runs out of missiles and there's no more missiles on screen. So that's going to be our end game. So I'm going to go into Flash Develop, so open up your first game and into the game loop, and we're going to add a new check every frame here called check end game condition. I'll just go ahead and create that function. So the first thing we want to do is check that our game is over by saying, has the player got 0 missiles and is there 0 missiles on screen? So let's check if the player has 0 missiles left and there's 0 missiles on screen. Then what we're going to do if that equals true is we need to stop all the things that we run every frame, and we need to disable a few things. So we don't want the player to be controlled anymore, we don't want the player to be shown, for example, and there's a few other things, but we'll put those down first. So we'll stop player movement. We'll also hide the player. We will stop spawning enemies because we don't need more enemies to show up after the game ends. And we'll also clear the enemies that are currently on screen, because otherwise it's just going to get in the way of our endgame screen. And lastly, we'll end the game loop, which is set up to an enter frame event listener, so we don't need to keep looping because obviously the game's over and there's no point running all those other checks. So stop the game loop. So that's a good little block of comments, so let's get coding with those. So first we're going to do is check if the player has 0 missiles left, so we set up a variable for that called nammo. So we'll see if nammo is equal to 0 and there's no missiles on screen. So one way we use for tracking how many missiles were currently on screen was that array that we set up called a missile array. So we'll test if that array equals 0, that way we know that there's no missiles on screen. So a missile array dot length equals 0. So both these conditions have to be true. 0 for this check to go through. And if it does equal true, we'll stop the player movement. So we'll get rid of the event listeners that are causing the player to move left and right, which I think we set up on the stage was key down and key up. So we'll stop those two. Stage, remove event listener, key up. And that was going to a function called key up. And likewise stage dot remove event listener for our key down. Okay, then we want to hide the player. So we've called our player MC player. We can just set its visibility to equal false. And we'll stop spawning enemies as well. So we spawned enemies every 1 second because we set up a timer for that up here in our constructor function. But at the moment this variable, tEnemyTimer, is just a local variable inside this function, so we need to turn it into a class member. So there's two ways you can do it. In Flash Develop you can just click on the word, press Ctrl-Shift-1 and promote it to a class member. But if you're not using Flash Develop you'll have to do it a little bit more manually. So to do it manually you get rid of the data type and you get rid of the var and you just have the variable name, And then up above here, before your constructor function, we'll set up a private variable called T enemy timer. And that's going to be a timer data type. So that's just shifted it up here, and it's been made public now. We can use it anywhere in these functions. So down here in our check endgame condition, we'll stop spawning our enemies by calling our T enemy timer and saying stop. And then we want to clear the enemies currently that are on the screen. So we're going to use a for loop for that, but we'll use a different kind of for loop which we haven't used yet. It's called a for each loop. And you typically use for each loops when you want to run through every variable in the array, and you don't really care about the position it's up to. Meaning it's not going to give you a position marker like we have set up for when we check our missile array, for example. Like we have a variable here called I that we can use to get the position in the array. In a for each, you don't really do that because you just want to run through everything in it. So I'm going to type out for each loop, and this is structured a little bit differently as well. So the first thing we need is the variable name that we want to grab for the object that we're currently up to. So in this case, I'm just going to call it enemy, and it's going to be a data type of MC enemy, and then we say in which array. So a enemy array. And we should have a var out the front of array just to create that new variable name. So now we can use enemy in this for loop. So there's two things we want to do. We obviously want to destroy the enemy. So we'll say destroy the enemy that we're currently up to in the for loop, and we want to remove it from the enemy array. So to destroy the enemy, we can just grab the variable enemy and we can say destroy, and then we want to get it out of the enemy array. So we'll just use a simple splice. So a enemy array, splice out the first object, and we just want 1 to be spliced out. Okay, and finally we want to stop the game loop. So there's a bit of a trick you got to use here, and that is, actually we'll get the game loop event listener out of the way first. So we'll say stage dot remove event listener, and that's going to be our enter frame, and that's currently running our game loop. So that endgame check is looking pretty good so far. That should stop our game as soon as we run out of missiles and there's no more missiles on screen. So let's give it a test. I'm just going to save and press Control Enter, and let's fire away till we're out of missiles. And yep, so it cleared some of the enemies. That red one still went by, and sometimes that happens because if we look in our endgame function, as soon as we hit this last bit up here, it's going to remove the enter frame. Therefore, this check is going to stop running as well, the check endgame condition. And if an enemy just spawns just as this function runs, it's not going to clear it in time. Like if an enemy spawns up here before this enter frame gets removed, it's going to spawn and move across the stage. So what we need to do is actually run through this check another time, so one more game loop, pretty much before we get rid of this enter frame. So what we can do is we can check if our A enemy array, if its length equals 0, meaning that there's definitely no more enemies on stage, then we'll get rid of the enter frame loop. So let's save that and test again, and let's see what happens this time. So testing away, and that time it cleared everything. That enemy just snuck on, but it got rid of it because we put that extra check in there. So that's working pretty well. Now what we need to do is show an endgame screen there. So something that pops up and says game over, would you like to play again? So let's go into Flash and create that screen. And we're going to create this internally. I'm going to show you another method to do it externally. And that was from an old tutorial, but we should have a new layer here. And we're just going to call this Endgame Screen. And at the moment there's nothing on it. So yeah, like I was saying, we're going to use an internal movie clip for this example, and in the next tutorial I'm going to show you how to use an external movie clip. And I'll explain the differences and the advantages and disadvantages of both in the next tutorial as well. But yeah, kind of running out of time, so let's create this screen. So I'm just going to create a box on this new layer, Endgame Screen, and I'm going to change it to some sort of grayish color. Yeah, that'll do. Don't want a stroke. And I'm just going to add some text to it that says game over. Would you like to play again? And then we'll just have, actually we won't have, would you like to play again? Get rid of that. Just have game over, and I'll paste it in here. Click here to play again. And obviously it's not a very fancy looking screen, but it'll get the job done for what we need. So I'm just going to highlight all of that. Make sure that it's all selected, but not these two text boxes up top. So I'm going to hold down Shift and click on those to get rid of them. And I'm going to turn this into a movie clip by pressing F8. So we'll call this movie clip MC Endgame Screen. Caps held down. MC Endgame Screen. We'll export it for Actionscript, and we'll leave the class name as that as well, because we're going to be creating an external class for this. So press OK, and we need to give this an instance name because it's on our stage and we're going to keep it there. So we'll call this menu end, something nice and simple. So that movie clip's done, and it's got a class, so we can start controlling the elements inside it with a new class. So I'm going to go over to Flash Develop and to our project. I'm going to create a new class. It's going to be called MC Endgame Screen, and we're going to make it extend movie clip, flash display movie clip. Okay, now that we've got this class set up, we're going to create a button inside of it. So inside this movie clip, just double click on it to go inside, and for our click here to play again, we want to turn this into a clickable button, and we want it centered as well. It's kind of off. Let's center it up, align to stage, and we're going to turn this text box here into a movie clip. So I'm going to press F8 on it and say MC play again. And we'll give it an instance name of MC play again as well. So that's on the stage inside of our movie clip. So we'll put a reference to that in our class by creating a public variable called MC play again. That's going to be a movie clip. So the first thing we need to do is when we get into this class is we need to set up a click handler for our MC play again button. So I'm going to say MC play again. Let's add an event listener, and we're going to listen for a mouse click. And then we'll go to a function called play again. And let's set up button mode for this as well, so we get that little hand cursor. MC play again, button mode equals true. So this function that we're going to go to, call play again, we're going to make Flash spit out a custom event, and then we're going to listen for that custom event in our main class, our document class. So up until this point, we've just been using standard event listeners that come with Flash. So for example, the keyboard event, key down, key up, the event that goes to enter frame, and the timer events. But with Flash you can create your own custom events, and you can put whatever you want in there and then listen for just that event as well. So to do that, we're going to type dispatch event, and we're going to send out a new event, and it's going to be our custom event called play again. And I just like typing my events in all capitals and separating spacebars with an underscore, but you're free to do it any way you want. This is just a string after all. So I'm going to save that, and now we've got this Endgame Screen, which is called menu end. Let's hop out of that. It's called menu end, and that's on our main stage. So back over in our first game class, we're going to add that as a public variable up here. It's public variable menu end, which is a type of MC Endgame Screen. And actually, before we start coding that screen, let's go back to it and set up a couple of helper methods that we can use to show and hide the screen. So just under our play again function, I'm going to create a public function here, and this is going to hide our screen. And it's not going to return anything, so we'll set it to void. And likewise, we'll make another public function called show screen. It's not going to return anything either. And the only two things we're going to do in each of these functions is the first one, we're going to say this movie clip. We're going to set your visibility to false because it's a hide screen. And show screen, yep, you guessed it. I'm going to set the visibility to true. Easy enough. So as soon as we enter our first game, if we save and test now, you can see that that game over screen is obviously there, and we don't want it to be there. So just after we initialize our variables, we're going to say menu end, which is the variable name, and we're going to hide the screen. That's it. So save and test, and this time our screen is going to be hidden at the start, which is good. So now when we play through our game and we run out of ammo, we get to the end, we want to be able to show that screen here at this point. So I'm going to go back into Flash Develop, go to our check endgame condition, and just before, actually just after we get rid of the game loop, I'm going to go over here and show our endgame screen. So we can say menu end show screen. So let's save this and test again. Play through our game, and when we get to the end, there's our endgame screen. And we've got that little mouse cursor to show up with a hand to say it's clickable, but it's not actually going anywhere at the moment. It's sending out an event, but we need to listen to that event and tap into it. So back over in Flash Develop at our constructor function, just before we hide our screen, we're going to set up an event listener for this object. So menu end, let's add an event listener, and we're going to listen for our custom event, which is just a string. So play again. And we're going to make it go to a function that we haven't set up yet called play again, or play game again. So let's go ahead and set up this function, and we're going to generate an event handler. And in our play again function, what we're actually going to do is reinitialize all these variables again. So instead of copying and pasting them in here, what I'm going to do is just cut out everything in our constructor function, paste it into here instead, and then in our constructor function, I'm just going to call play game again in here. So because we want to run the code, there's no point copying and pasting and duplicating it. The only difference is that play again should be sent an event, because remember we're attaching it to an event listener, but you don't have to send an event. There's no rule that says that you have to, so you can just pass in null up here. So when we run our game, all this code's still going to run as normal, So our screen gets hidden, the enemies come on screen, and we play through our game, and our endgame screen shows up. So when we click here to play again, we go back, our score gets reset, but our play is not there, because remember we set it to hide on our check endgame condition. So the last thing we have to do is, in our play again function, just up here where we initialize the variables, we can also say MC player and set its visibility to equal true. Save, test one more time, and hopefully everything should work as intended. Game over, we'll play again, there's our player, can still move around, play through again, and everything's working pretty well. So I think that'll do for this tutorial. So in the next tutorial we're going to do a start game screen, and we're going to load that from an external movie clip. So one of the advantages of this is that when you have separate movie clips, you can give it to your different team members. Say there's one guy just doing the user interface, you can give him the start game screen, the end game screen, the instruction screen if you need one, for example, and he can go off and work on that while you work on the game. And it's just one way to collaborate with your teammates and not just have one file which you store everything into. So yeah, we'll come back, we'll do that one in the next one. So hope you got something out of this, and we'll see you again next time.